Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Barry Kostrinsky, president of the Artist Talk on Art, ATOA. ATOA was founded in 1975 in New York City, and since then has been the longest running dialogue on the visual arts, not only in New York City, but in the United States. As a result of COVID, the ATOA has switched from in-person dialogue, which has always been on the Lower West Side of New York City, and now has done a virtual format every week, every Monday, like you're going to see tonight. And not too far down the road, restrictions are being lifted, and we will be going back shortly, maybe September, October, to sort of a monthly first of the month, something that you'll be seeing on our website and in our emails. We are a 501c3. All of our talks are free. We hope you enjoy what you see. If you'd like to contribute, you can take a look at our website, atoanyc.org. All the information is there, and you can reach out to me. Spread the word if you enjoy it. If you are excited to present about your art, or you have a theme of something that you'd like to present, reach out to me as well. That's how we get our talks. Future talks can be seen in calendar on our website, and even though it's not listed, actually October and November are pretty full as of just recently. Past talks can be seen on our YouTube channel. The links are in the website. Tonight we have Nicolas Touron, Daniel Reiser, and Sema Gurun, three artists presenting. This is an example of a talk that these artists are not linked. They're just individual artists presenting, and then they'll share everything and anything that they choose and like about their past, their present, their practices. And I just want to welcome the three artists and let you know our format is to have people feel willing to jump in, to ask questions, and to engage in thoughts. We'll start off, Nicolas, with yourself. Nicolas, tell us a little bit about where you're from, and it's nice to meet you here.
Hello, thank you, Barry, for having me. Well, as you quickly will notice, I'm French, little accent on the background who doesn't, disappear with time. I was born in France, and when I was in the 70s, and when I was young, around 16, my parents sent me to a trade school to be a cook. And so I did that. I worked as a French cook for 15 years, and as it was easy for a French cook to find jobs everywhere, I traveled, in France, went to work from place to place. And I ended up in Amsterdam, in Holland, where I was hired as a chef in a Michelin star restaurant. And when I was there working, I decided to go back to school and study art, because I wanted to climb the social ladder. So I entered art school there called Gerrit Rietveld Academy, who's a famous art school, based on the name of a Dutch architect. And when I was there, I started to work with making 3D objects, and I used to make sketch of this little object. And when I came to the US with a Fulbright program to do a master, I showed my sketch to my teacher, and they thought they were great. So I started to make more of them, and I did a little bit less 3D objects. So I'm going to start showing you some of this work that I did when I arrived in the US, like flat work. And then I'm going to move to ceramic work that I went back to work with once I was in the US. And I'm going to end up by talking about 3D printing with clay, which is a technique I learned a few years ago, and I thought was super interesting. And now I base most of my work around that, using printing clay with a printer. I will show you how the machine work as I go on. So I'm going to start by showing you some of the flat work I did. And most of the work were made with just tiny drawing, and I will compose them over several days just by filling up the page with little stories. I will start with drawing a personage, making that personage do something, go to sleep. The day after, I will add another personage. And I did that, I think, because working in a kitchen, when you make a dish, you know, you have all of these elements you put in a dish to make a recipe, yes? And it was a process who worked really well for 15 years while I was working in the kitchen. So I just stick to it, you know. Every time I will make an artwork, I will make little object, and this little object, these little stories at the end will make a bigger story. Yeah? So I use often gouache and paper. I did also use oil paint, but these two were more recent, are gouache on paper. And I will lay down, you know, with pencil, make little drawing all over the page, then restate it with a pen, fill up the space with gouache, and then again restate the line until the work was completed. And I really enjoy making this work, but you know, again, I did that more because when I arrived in the States, I started to sell a lot of this work, you know, and money was welcome, so I kept on making them. And then a few years later, I got a little bit tired, you know, because ultimately I did like working with my hand and making 3D objects more than making flat work, probably because 15 years in kitchen were calling back. So I went back to make more complex, you know, object using ceramic. And so I started again using that material, mainly porcelain, you know, was an interesting material to work with, a lot of constraint, but still, you know, a nice finish, a nice rendering. And so I started again to do still the same logic where I will make a lot of objects and just assemble them together to make, you know, a larger contraption, like a bigger story made of smaller stories that I will put together. I never try to over elaborate my work. I had also a tender spot for a lot of artists like Debuffett, naive artists, or artists who were working without an art education. I thought it was a really interesting process, see what they did, and I did the same. I never conceptualized too much what I was doing. I always like to make personage, to create little story, make object, and just put them together to see what happened. So I kept on working with ceramic, making still flat work, describing personage, and then making some of this personage in 3 dimensions using, again, porcelain and different material. And because when you learn cooking, you have to learn a lot of practical aspect on making stuff. Yes, there is no room for having fun. You really have to make sure that your production is well made. You have to make sure that you make a lot of work. So I had a tendency to try to plan to do something every time I was in a different space. And I was traveling a lot to France. And as I was traveling to France, every time I was in the airport with nothing to do, I decided that I should find something to do in that bloody airport for the 3 hours I was waiting for my flight. So I started to learn some 3D program to make objects on my computer while I was waiting at the airport. And so some of the objects I made were that. And I did that. It's like a 3D puzzle made out of metal. And I could create this object with just a program called Illustrator, very easy to use, just by making the outline of bones of animal. And this is made the same way. You remember these toys that we used to buy, like dinosaur, out of a plate of wood. You will pop out the piece of wood and you will assemble it in a 3D puzzle, yes? I thought that was a really clever way of making object. And I thought that I could make really large object who could be easy to store and pack with this program and that technique, yes? Because again, cook, being practical. So I started to make a lot of object like that, you know, that's about 12 foot tall. And it's
Nicholas, I want to point out, Regina Silver says interesting to see how the 2D work is translated into the 3D ceramic pieces. But in this image, certainly to see the 2D painting on the wall and then how you're 3-dimensional and your sort of feel for line and form, how it translates. It's a very nice curation having those two objects next to each other.
Yes. Yeah, I enjoy doing it, you know. Often I thought, you know, I should just focus on one medium. You progress quicker when you do that. But, you know, at the end, you have to do what you get to do. So I did like the, you know, switching back and forth really helped both process. So after making this 3D piece, I still did enjoy working more with porcelain and ceramic because, you know, it's more organic. There is a lot of game, a lot of stuff to learn with it. And it's close to food, you know, you have to cook it. You know? And then the end result is always different, you know, so that was more interesting. So I still kept on the back of my mind that I was going to use computer more and still also do a lot of stuff by hand. So I was trying to think about way I could combine that. At that time, I started to make a lot of little objects in porcelain. So all of these little objects that you see on that surface are made with porcelain using different technique, using stain, glaze, different material, glass, you know, really a lot of technique. So I was making a lot of little objects, and again, I will put them together. I will have boxes and boxes of objects, and every month I will put them together over a surface, fire it to bind them together, and it will make a story. Then I decided that this plate with all of this composition on the top, I should find a way to elevate them. And then I discovered at that time printing with clay. And I started to play a little bit with it. You know, I didn't have an idea of like an object just made with 3D printing clay, but I started to play around building up structure to support my sculpture. Yes. So the white part there, that kind of pillar, is made again with printing porcelain. Yes, that's about 35-inch tall. And the piece on the top are handmade, you know, so like that, I could make stories and add to the story and add to the story. And so I made a whole series of this work. This is another example of a smaller version of this object. And again, on the top, you have the handmade little pieces that I will do during the months when I am in the studio. And when I will be home with nothing to do, I will design the piece under with a 3D program, you know, so like that. If I was not in my studio and I wanted to do a 3D object, I could still do it. And I thought it was great, yes, because sometimes you feel like doing something, you're in the wrong place. But with 3D program, I could do an object even when I am not in my studio.
Nicolas, if I said I sort of see a surreal combination of objects, is that something you'd like, or is that not something you would want?
I go for it, Barry. You know, again, me, when I study cooking, it's, you know, it's a hard job, 12 hours a day, you know, 6 days a week, you know, you really produce a lot of work. You know, there is no, now I do it in my studio, I take a little break for coffee, but when you work in the kitchen, you really have 6 hours to work like a crazy because, you know, the deadline is coming for you to have ready before the service. And in the service, you have to work twice faster. So doing that for so many years, I didn't build up any form of feeling for what people will think about what I did. Yes, or if I do it and people like it, it was easier in the kitchen. People will eat it. It was good, fine, good end of the day. In art, you know, the reaction, people see it. I thought it was interesting when I went in art school, but because I had already that background of making stuff in that context, I never really reacted to it in any way. I was like, you know, my day is finished. I did the dish, you know, that's it, you know. So however interpretation is done, you know, me, what I see when I do it is all of the little objects. I really like color. So, you know, there is that in the work. After, the reason why I put it together, it never bothered me as, you know, is there a background to that? Yes. So yes.
Interesting. I like it. And I love how you're constantly drawing back to your experience as a chef, because, you know, I wouldn't have guessed that by looking at the work. I totally get how you're building your process of one beautiful object, another precious objects, combine them, storyline happens, whatever storyline. I like that. I totally get it. But it's fascinating the reference back to techniques that you use from cooking. So in general, chefs are incredible artists. Phil Roy and Bach did a book where they had the great chefs of the world. Turns out, and they had them do artwork. It turns out, in general, the pastry chefs were the ones that were even slightly more talented. And than the your traditional chef. But do go on. Very interesting, Nicolas.
Yeah, you're right. Pastry had some good aspect to it, though there is, in the world of kitchen, there is pastry for kitchen and there is pastry for pastry. A lot of recipes were designed by cook, yes, and they are different than the pastry designed by baker. For example, tarte tatin is a cook dish, yes, because it's something you will cook in the oven where you will roast something because you didn't have the oven to bake. So there is a lot of recipe, a lot of design, and obviously the charm of making cake is the fact that you have also recipe to guide you. So you can work on it in a kind of instinctive way, but you have also like frame who can help you, achieve a more predictable end result. When you cook a piece of meat, it depends on how that piggy or that cow was raised. Yes, so there is some stuff you can't control. But a cake, you have your portion, you can make a predictable result. Yeah, so it doesn't work the same. Yeah, but there is some interesting part with both of them. I'm just going to stop sharing that, and I'm going to show you guys just to help oversee a little bit the process. Some little video of the printing being done. I filmed that, for some other purpose. And so this is a few snapshots of like object being printed with clay. The printer works basically like a syringe. Yes, it's a syringe who's pulling out a tube of clay on the top of another tube of clay, just like coil, building up coil and piling up something. The logic of it is just that. It's a coil on the top of a coil. And because the coils are so close to each other, it flattens into something who look like a line. But what's coming out of the printer, it's a tube. Yes, it's just so flat and so close from the next tube that they just get flattened. And so those were like steps of sculpture that I made. And when I started to use the machine, computer were not my friend, like a lot of people. But luckily, with years passing and a lot of people creating new machine and new program, I got a hand out of it. And I learned that you don't need to know every aspect of a program in order to use it. So I also uploaded for you a short video of some shape and how they look. The program allowed me, when I create a shape, to make a little animation just, to visualize what's done. Yes. And so I put together a few shapes just to show you how they look in the virtual world before being printed. Yes. And again, some of this video I did for a Chinese institution famous for its ceramic production in a town called Jindazhen, where I was invited to make some ceramic work, and I created some little program for them. I just make the object rotate to show the student, how the object look from every side. And so this object, when I designed them, for me to use them with that printer, they have to be made with a kind of continuous wall, from down to up. That's what worked the easiest. Now the object, when you see under them, they look full, and that's what the printer need to. But at the end, when the objects are printed, it's just the outer wall.
What program are you using?
I'm using something called Fusion 360.
Oh, yeah, I know Fusion. Yeah.
They have like a lot of like pre-made shape who are kind of easy as a startup,
I do want to read Babs Reingold says, I think, and echoes all of our thoughts. Wow, the printer is fascinating. Francine Kornfeld, that's amazing, Nicolas. Babs says it reminds her of Roxy Payne's first automated art machines.
Oh, I forgot about Roxy Payne.
Yes, some of his work earlier. I mean, though obviously his work was more using the machine to do a work. Me, I'm using the machine as just another tool in my kitchen.
They developed a 3D printer for at MIT to do the same thing in glass, which was pretty interesting.
Yes, I'm collaborating with an artist called Ami Lemay, who's working at Urban Glass. We're doing some piece together where I'm designing some work with some opening so she can include some glass coming out of the object. This is, for example, a bottle. It looks full, but the object needs to be designed like that. And ultimately, the top will be empty. Some of these pieces have like, a lot of them have ring on the top. It's because they are designed as a modular piece where I could create another piece with the base also as a ring, and then I can attach them later. The fact that it's clay, you know, for most of you, I guess, and did touch clay at some time, you know, the fact that I print them still doesn't mean that I'm not able to later modify it by hand. So a lot of pieces that I made are partly printed, partly modified, and I can create a lot of modular pieces like that. So I have a few examples of.
Are you working with cone 6 fired clay? And
yes, earlier I did that. Some of the first image you saw of the ceramic work was cone 6. The one I'm going to show you now are cone 10.
Okay. And when you attach by glaze firing, do you go down to a lower cone?
No, actually, what I do is when I print the object is printed out of soft clay. So I just keep it aside and then print another object, and then I weld them when the clay is still soft. So they are assembled just out of the printer, and then they dry. You know, so they are not welded together with the
glaze, right? When you do your 3D printer, but when you do your separate individual pieces that you showed us, and then you arrange them.
Yes, the first sample, that the platform that I show, I guess you're referring to that. Yes, what I did, I fired all of the pieces separately. Most of them the color came out of stain, yes. So then I apply a transparent cone 6 glaze, then I fire them separately. Then I put them together on the platform, apply a thin layer of cone 04 transparent glaze on the platform, and that bind them together.
Yes, I figured you did that. I just want to point out, it's a very good trick in ceramics. You know, to put everything together is great, but sometimes it's almost impossible. But to go ahead and then have different parts, go to a lower cone, a lower temperature, so that you don't open up your colors in your original glaze, and just use a lighter glaze as like a glaze glue, you can get amazing effects that you couldn't hand build. It would be too delicate. You couldn't do it.
Yeah, ceramic is great. So many recipes, like endless research for the rest of your life. Sometimes it's a bit overwhelming, but you know, often it's like there is always a solution for something somewhere.
And you obviously you go through 2 firings, a bisque, and then a glaze.
Yes, for the platform that you saw, actually there was first I made the little object, bisque fire them, apply a clear glaze, high fire them, apply a low fire clear glaze, fire them together, and often apply also luster and transfer and refire them. So most of these big platforms were fired about 6-7 times, you know, depending on the color and design. Luster being, for example, that gold on the piece we are looking right now, it's luster. So these pieces were 3D printed, and they were made of several prints attached together and then fired at cone 10 in a gas kiln in a reduction with a celadon glaze, and then a layer of gold applied to it. What I also like with that technique of 3D printing is, like I said, I like to make story where I have personage and I put them together. And by making modular piece, I can create, again, a piece where on the top of it, I can attach different personage. And then I can make another piece, take back the same personage or other personage and make another story by just recombining them in different direction. So it does have like a kind of, it forced me to do something technically quite advanced, but I can be also really playful because I can just have my collection of personage, print them and put them together. This is another piece made with like several little monkeys in different position, and same, it's about 35-inch tall and made with content porcelain. little bit difficult sometimes to handle some of the warping and deformation that porcelain do, and especially when the print have like a lot of curved corners, you know, stuff move a little bit left and right, but that come with the territory. And so I made like more or less complex objects. Sometimes I just print the personage by themselves. Yes, and you can see, for example, the personage on the left or the bird on the right. You see, this is the same bird there facing in a different direction. Yes, and I believe that's somewhere there. Here you have the same smaller personage on the front. Yes, it's him printed in a different way. You can also do a lot of like manipulation of this object, which is great. You know, you create a personage, you can save it at a different file, add something, stretch it, flatten it, and now you have, you know, 10 versions of the same personage. And it snowballed quite quick, you know, where after a few steps, you know, the first designing of personage took me quite a long time, but once you create like box of personage, it's quickly snowball and go much faster. So the learning curve is maybe a good year, but after that, you know, really get easy. And you don't need, I didn't learn everything from the program. I didn't need to learn every aspect. I just learned, you know, about a third of the program in order to do that.
Nicholas, Francine Kornfeld says, it makes me think of the work of Antonio Gaudi. I assume you're familiar with the beautiful
Yes.
architecture and playfulness in his work and combined materials. As well, Sema, who'll be speaking later on, says it reminds her of sandcastles. And, you know, watching the way it's extruded and the round coil gets flattened just by pressure, it is so fascinating. I will let everyone know, firing at cone 10, the highest of the fires, is one of the most challenging. Working in porcelain is one of the most challenging. You are taking all this on as like a craftsman as well, like a chef going after a challenge. I sense that.
I think so. Earlier, you know, when I came to the US, I was like, why should I talk about my past as cook? But, you know, it worked. I can't escape it. Yes. Does any one of you know this artist's part of what will be called in the US an outsider called Ferdinand Cheval, or the Facteur Cheval?
No.
Then let me just look at this work, and then let me show you his work. And so the Ferdinand Cheval was a postman. He was a postman, and in France, and not
Beautiful. Yeah, I think I know his work. I know
Yes.
his work. Yeah.
He was not educated as an artist, and he didn't care. What he did is every morning he will go.
That's amazing.
He will go deliver his mail with his wheelbarrow, and he will collect stone in the town on the side of the pit, you know, everywhere in the village, and he will bring his stone back to his home. And every weekend, with the stone he collected, he will build up that crazy contraption, which is a castle. You know, he built up a castle in his backyard, and it became really famous as, you know, a kind of outsider artist. And I always enjoy his work. And I didn't know his work before I did my work, because strangely enough, I was ignorant of French artists, because I left just to work as a cook in my life. You know, I never went to see a museum when I was young. I just saw the back of a stove. But I think like mental process and creation and how he assembled his stuff is similar to what I do.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yes, he made a beautiful, he wanted to be entombed in his castle, but it was forbidden by French law. So when he learned that, he quickly made a small version of his castle in the cemetery for him to be buried, you know, who look like that. So that he will be, you know, entombed in something similar as his castle, you know. So I think it's not by random that my work looks similar. He's French, I am too, and sometimes you don't escape that. Yes.
You cannot escape the French.
You know, I recently saw the in the Brooklyn Museum, the Nikki St. Phal exhibit is up. And there is that playfulness, that weird combination. She makes individual objects and they sort of come alive in a sort of crazy Disneyland park.
Yes.
Sorts.
Storytelling is something super, it's a recurrent thematic in a lot of French art form, as not telling a story, but the fact that stories are being told, and you're going to talk about the fact that a story is being told, you know, a little loop. Yes.
It's very Truffaut. Very Truffaut.
Yes.
Yes.
Same. I discovered that only later. So I have a few more images of, you know, similar objects, but I'm going to leave some time for my fellow artists. And if you guys have any question about that process or technique, let me know.
Let's see.
Otherwise, I'll give it back to you, Barry.
Okay, I'll stop the screen sharing. I want to thank you, Nicolas. Let me
Be my guest.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Nice delivery.
Yeah, and you know, you focused mainly on your ceramics, but in the beginning, you threw in some beautiful drawings.
Yeah, the drawings are lovely.
They really were. I mean, I've got to ask you this because I just saw something on Keith Haring and on, you know, something that's going around Netflix, and Kenny Scharf was talking, and he said one thing. Kenny Scharf kept saying, you know, don't downplay the influence of drugs. There was a lot of drugs. And it made me look at his colors a little differently.
Yeah, I bet.
When I see work like you're doing, Nicolas, I think of like psychedelic, trippy art. Am I right? Is there any hallucinogen influence in here? Talk to me.
My wife, who's nearby, always joke and tell me, you're doing that because you're the son of a policeman. And she's saying that as the opposite of what you said, you know, like, I don't want to do anything wrong because I'm the son of a policeman. So no drugs.
That was my second thought. I thought you were a policeman's son. That was my second go-to, I just want to say.
I want to say, Nicolas, that blending the cooking, the art of cooking with the art, with your art in visual arts is really fascinating and also delicious. I would say the word delicious.
Hungry.
Thank you. I did some video actually when I was studying, when I started my undergraduate in Holland. I was still working in the kitchen because somebody had to pay the apartment where I was staying and the school, you know. So I used to work every weekend in the kitchen and every night in the kitchen while going in the school during the day. And so on the early stage, I made a lot of video, were quite popular, and I win a few prizes around me as a French cook making some arty recipe. But once I left the kitchen, I stopped because I thought it was silly to talk about something I stopped doing. You know, I only wanted to talk about what was relevant. You know, if I was making food to pay for my art school, then I could do something about it. You know, it was a connection there.
I think it's a great segue to Daniel. Before we go to Daniel, I just want to remind everybody, this is ATOA, Artists Talk on Art. All of our talks are free. You can go to our website. We're a 501c3. If you'd like to contribute, that greatly helps what we do. I do want to welcome, before Daniel speaks, Cameron Saltzman is our new intern for the Artist Talk on Art. Her face does not look like what's under her name, but she's put up our sort of sign for the Artist Talk on Art and is now involved with our Instagram. She receives credit through NYU and a program that we've linked with before. So welcome and thank you, Cameron. Thanks so much for what you do and becoming a part of the ATOA.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Great. Well, thank you. And Daniel, let's move over to you.
Okay.
Nice to see you and welcome.
Nice to see you. Haven't done this in a while. I'm going to get on to, I'm going to try to find what I had up.
Take your time, Dan. While you're doing it, I do want to read Robin Halpern had said, impressively diverse and creative works for your presentation, Nicolas. Someone identified as an iPhone says, amazing work. Fran Beeler, expecting very nice things, Nicholas, wonderful work. And just very positive comments from our group. So thanks, Daniel. Go ahead.
Okay, hi, greeting everyone. Let's see, background is I grew up in Boston in Rhode Island area. I went to school at Rhode Island School of Design. I actually started out in ceramic glass and worked with Dale Chihuly and James Carpenter during that period. And sculpture department, but also I had a great deal of interest in other areas. So I was involved in design, industrial design, architecture. So I don't want to really career, but I chose really not to talk so much about the work that I've done in the past, although they're projects and what I would call things or influence. And most of my world has been of a collaborator. So I'm very comfortable withdrawing from the ego. Part of what sometimes is involved in the art world, you know, in that world for a long time. I at the John Gallery for many years and worked in Europe for quite some time. But I think that, you know, I wanted to start out with Jamie Carpenter, who is a friend mentor for decades. And I think what it says here, and I'll just read it out loud, is that you have no idea where your career is going. I mean, it's not a career, actually. You're sort of moving from one interest opportunity to another. Somehow they sort of are interconnected, or you're trying to keep them somehow interconnected on occasion, and then other times they are going off in a totally different direction. I think that pretty well describes sort of my background and where my mindset is coming from, because I was very involved, engaged. Of course, I went to art school in the art world and still am, but things that came along that I was capable of addressing and thinking of in the same way sort of fell into place. So I became involved in public art. I was involved in the Buckminster Fuller Institution for 10 years, doing restoration and redesigning of his last projects, the Flyside Domes. And I'm going to go through a series of sort of random images because I just sort of threw them together of things of influence. And what happens with different types of projects that I've been engaged with, oftentimes sort of, they do interconnect. So I'm not just thinking about that project as, let's say, a design project or a building project, public art project, but other elements sort of enter into my mind, whether it's filmmaking or the sort of socio-economic relationship that I have with the workers that I'm involved with, who become interested in not just, you know, their skill sets being extremely high, but also interested in what we're doing. So it becomes a great sort of educational process and a intercollaborative sort of mindset that is sort of very satisfying for me. And so I'll just run through a bunch of images. This is interesting project. What we're doing, that's me here with a bunch of my comrades. And we're actually in Bristol, Rhode Island. And we are doing the restoration of Buckminster Fuller's 24-foot Flyside Dome, which was his last projects. And there were only 3 prototypes made. And they were actually really only prototypes. So they never quite worked, and we sort of resurrected them. And so we came to a boatyard in Rhode Island that specialized in composite construction, CNC milling. And these were all designed for modular systems. They were originally conceived of as the autonomous dwellings for homes earlier on. And what was interesting is that this company did design the American Cup boats. And so the people who worked there had a very high skill set in boat making and became, as I said, very engaged in Buckminster Fuller, where they would go home and they would ask me questions and I would tell them, go look at this YouTube. They would come back to the shop. And our discussion was not only about making and restoring the complexity of these objects, which were designed back in the 60s, but also the discussion on the floor was about what he was thinking about, or what these objects were about. And so for me, project sort of bloomed out into sort of a bigger mindset for me. This is, like Nicholas, this is a big cooking oven. And so we are taking all the parts and we had to glaze them, we had to re-gel them, we had to take them down, we had to repair them. And here there's a specialized paint that is used in yacht racing that we did to restore these parts. But it ended up for me looking like 2001 Space Odyssey. And all of a sudden the parts became more objects for me, rather than just modular systems that fit together to make this much more complex object. And so they are in a cooking oven right now. And we then went on to his second prototype, which was the 50-foot Flyside Dome, which we resurrected out of the dirt. What's interesting about this whole project is that Buckminster Fuller used other people with other skill sets. So the man that designed these and actually figured out the geometry of what these are was still alive in California and figured out the geometry on a Hewitt-Packard early calculator. And he was part of Hobie Cat surfboard making and this just incredible savant, which I am still friends with. What was interesting, I'll just briefly it's a long story, but I would be trying to understand the geometry of geodesics, and I would be writing him, where are the plans, and I would get huge stories back. I would oh my God, this is like I'm reading a novel of a history. And I kept on saying, but where are the drawings and where are the drawings? Because I'm like, there's got to be drawings for this. And then I realized after a very long period of time that the design for these were done in California on the back of a napkin at a restaurant. So we had to then go back in and rescan using a Lindar scanning system to redesign the parts so that they could be remade again. And here is, I'm sorry, this is upside down. If you flip it around, this was actually, and I don't think I can flip this around, but it was, it went to two places. It was designed, restored out in California, and it was shipped to Toulouse, France, where it went up in Toulouse in an incredible sort of section by the river, which was constantly flooding back and forth in between us setting this up. And we would work at night with a lighting team from 11 to 2 to get the lighting right from both the inside and the outside of it. This is another part of that. This is in Amsterdam, where we experienced a large-scale environmental hurricane, and luckily the dome itself stood up. This, I'm just going to go through a little bit of this project. This was this is the dome that was Not the original. It was actually designed as a computer model, and we redesigned all the parts for it. From 10 parts down to 5 parts. It had to be made as a hurricane-proof object because of Miami design codes. There's a Fujimoto behind that. Then going on, and I'm sorry about the positioning of this. I'm not sure how to change this, Barry. This is in Bilbao, Spain. This is, if you can sort of like imagine, this is done by an artist, Doug Wheeler, who I worked with in close collaboration with. And again, the collaboration became much more than a collaboration. It was kind of like a Vulcan, your Star Trekky guys, a mind meld where I really had to sort of enter into his mind to understand what he was doing. And here, you're actually walking into what would be an extremely large room. And as if you were to take an orange and cut out a doorway and walk into that room, and there were no corners whatsoever, but it was lit in such a way that people who entered here didn't really know where they were in space or in time. And what was interesting in here was we worked with local craftsmen who were expert plaster makers, and the curvatures for the space, for the room, which you can see here, were designed at an auto factory shop, and then they were all made out of plaster and hung off this like crazy scaffold in the back of it. This is a piece that I did that was shown as my work at the Brooklyn Museum. It is a classic 4-color screen print called Separation. It's called The Little Doctors. I was at that point in time interested in phenomena. People were seeing UFOs. They were interested in. I was interested in sort of mass sightings in the same type of things of like raining frogs, or seeing Mary bleeding in the window. It was all sort of about that. So this becomes sort of a narrative conceptual concept. This is a piece that we did. I was doing filmmaking at that time. We were doing a lot of film installation. This is actually a river that was filmed out in Oregon, where we had cameras over the entire river, and the salmon would go from one section of the frame to the next section of the frame. So it was projected on the gallery on the floor, and you could see the fish move from one frame to the other in the same way as you can see in this film that we did. So this was, again, a collaboration. So I became very comfortable with taking me out of the picture and working with teams of people. It became much more sort of satisfying for me after I was engaged with doing much more artwork and showing at John Gibson, which is, this is Upside Down, which is a drawing of a film installation with a early sort of film called Zigzag with potato cans hanging off the wall. These are, I'm running through these. This is part of a film installation. This is sort of a narrative where I'm using singular clips of films that sort of make up this entire sort of scenario and film installation that I was involved with at John Gibson. And excuse me, running backwards, I'm going to go over to, I've got to catch on to, excuse me, some other things here. Oops, my apologies. Go back.
No problem, Dan. Take your time. Let me ask you, when you showed
Yeah.
one image, for some reason, Vito Acconci came to mind.
Right, okay. So yes, I did. I don't know where you went, where I went. Can you?
You know his hanging bookshelf that he did towards the end of his career?
Yes, I worked with Vito for a while. He was close friends with Dennis Oppenheim.
Yes.
I was Dennis's assistant for a number of years. So I'm trying to locate it. These are other images from the restoration of these objects that we were involved with. This is the exhibition that I worked on and designed with Norman Foster, the architect, for Design Miami. And I'm just going to have to sort of move over to, okay, here we go. Nope, it's not going to open. My apologies. I've got to get to it. Does anyone have any questions?
You know, there are a couple I want to read, and I think Alyssa Pritzker asked what's on all of our mind. Dan, how'd you get to be a part of the team? You're mentioning some real heavyweight in the art world. And were you able to select the colleagues to work for? Or how did
Yeah, so I had friends with very specific skill sets and who I knew I could, I'm trying to find my folder, sorry. Just give me 1 second, I've lost it. I would work with people with very specific skill sets. So I couldn't do all this myself. And so I would bring in people who knew more about certain types of fabrication than I did. If I was involved in making films for myself, I would bring in people who had, again, certain skill sets. So I developed a network of people. And I also was very involved, here we go, in product design. So I did quite a bit of work, and I'm trying to find, these are some of the objects from the original development of the geometry for those domes. This is Robert Grosner, who just showed at Karma. He, again, tremendous influence on me as a young artist.
Dan, I don't think we're seeing other images. Do you want to unscreen share and then try it again? Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, this is an interesting process that involves carbon fiber technology. These parts are CNC'd on a special CNC machine. They are then sort of almost like a suit of different types of fiberglass that are layered over, so there's no seams on this, and then they're sanded down and molded down into these parts, and then they're vacuum formed. The epoxy resin that makes up the parts are put into a bag and then formed into the actual parts. So they become very sort of interesting objects. This is the piece in France. As you can see, so it was in a beautiful section in Toulouse, which we had really good cassoulet at 11 o'clock at night, Nicolas, which they're famous for.
Now you're speaking Nicholas's language.
Yeah.
Cassoulet, that hits. You know, it's funny how both of you sort of took on the technical challenges and, you know, really went deep into it and used it to your advantage. As I think Nicolas had said, another tool in his toolbox. And Dan, you're certainly doing the same. It's interesting how Nicolas made little individual pieces at times and then just put them together. Where when you showed one piece, Dan, you showed this large construction that was separated into separate pieces. And then you saw in that separate unconstructed form or deconstructed form, sort of the beauty of the individual. It was an interesting sort of different approach, but similar approach that both of you use. And as well, the amount of design in your work, of course, has to speak to Nicholas's too.
Well, you know, I mean, it just you know, I designed also in ceramics for mass production. I worked in Italy for the glass factory Venini for a couple of years, designing lines there. We would get up every morning and go out to Murano and work with the glass blowers, which was a great experience as a young man, and learned quite a bit about the technique of glass making, Venetian traditional, you know, glass making, and they have a whole series of apprenticeships to the master glass blower. This is how they actually make those parts that you just saw. These are in a vacuum bag, and then the epoxy is injected in, and then it's taken out and dried out. This is the top of one of the domes. This is it's a drawing installation of my artwork that, again, is kind of, you know, I mean, if I'm going back to Nicholas, these are kind of different parts, different images that are then assembled into, so there are multiple images, multiple things happening within the installation itself.
Let's wrap it up with a few more, Dan. Show us.
Okay. So this is an early piece of mine that probably was from the 90s, that's shown at John Gibson. I did these are glasses designed for the Vera Wang collection. The idea came as I was sitting in the showroom. I was watching all these girls with incredible waists going by, and I'm like thinking, well, what's she all about? And I'm like, oh, okay, well, there it is, and that became the design. And this is for a installation for the Amsterdam Light Festival that I did in collaboration with a team of friends of mine. This is a drawing from that. This is part of the lighting system for this field of lighting objects that float throughout part of the canals that reflected light from below and back down. It's called disruption, and it would be reactive to the waves going back and forth. So the reflection field would go out across the Amsterdam canals. Let me just see a few more things that I can bring up.
I think some of the answer to how'd you get to be a part of some of these teams is you developed expertise and then you brought on other experts.
Yeah, you know, I like I was saying, I mean, this is like the Matthew Barney show that I did with Matthew Barney and collaborated with him on the museum-wide exhibition. It just fell into place where I became comfortable working in a number of different areas. And as I was saying, going from glass production to doing the Bucky thing, to doing my own work, all became part of the same recipe. And so I applied the same mental activity to everything that I did, you know, and with the result of, you know, producing the best and highest quality concept that are in result that I could possibly do with other team members. Not that I don't, so I was like a jelly bean jar. And now that jelly bean jar, after years, I'm wanting to, as I said to Nicholas, I want to like kind of extract some of these back out and go back into like my original interest in ceramics, going back into a more intensified art practice that would involve filmmaking and architecture, trying to actually take all of this and squish it into one recipe so that I'm not, if I can do that, spread out more than I need to be at this point.
Dan, I'm going to stop the screen sharing and open it up to
Sure.
questions. And first, thank you, Dan. That was very nice.
Thank you.
You know, complicated work at the same time as it's very much visually appealing. Jenna Lash asked, do you prefer working alone or being collaborative? And I'm going to throw in there, I sense you prefer being collaborative.
Yes. I mean, even when I'm alone, I'm sort of collaborating with certain people I have a very specific kinds of discussions with about what I'm doing. If I want to bounce off concepts, ideas, if I'm too stuck in one area, I'll call my friend Richard, who will torture me for a while, and I have to sort of rethink things. I do like working alone, but I do have the nature of collaboration really started when I was at RISDee, and working with Dale Chihuly and Jamie. We all sort of, we were a pack team, and we all supported each other. And that's what I really liked about it, because the ideas were not just my ideas, they were everybody's ideas, and so it's, like being in the kitchen, so everybody contributed and everybody got credit for what they did. And certainly, I certainly enjoyed showing a lot when I was at John Gibson, when I was showing, my own work. It was shown in Europe. I've been in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art. Certainly that collaboration went over into production facilities in glassmaking and Benini, or whether I was doing a high-end super production team where you have to really work with factory people. So it became a social economic. I was keeping people on work, and I was also helping them, I felt, giving back to them something new, even though like in some factories you would go, but we can't make this, we don't know how to do this, but you do know how to do this, and we'll show you a new way to do it. And then all of a sudden their lives would be enriched in sort of a different kind of way because they knew they could do it. And they were, so we participated in that. And when, in working with Bob Grosner, Dennis Oppenheim, Leon Golub, Nancy Spero, was all individual. It was individual, but it was all shared, And so I've learned a number of different types of techniques going on, especially learning about CNC machines and rapid prototyping and all that kind of thing.
I'd just like to comment, Nicolas Touron, who spoke earlier, says, reminds me of a Tillier Van Leishout multi-layer projects. You're doing interesting work. And I think one of the nicest things is we can hear you say, and you're thinking of something new. You're thinking of how you're evolving. Both of you artists, Nicholas and Dan, have made mention of, what's coming next. And I think that's sort of a force that keeps us going. I'm going to move on to our, yes, go ahead, Alyssa.
Yes, I would like to say, Dan, congratulations for, amazing projects. And also it's totally understandable that you need to work on a team because they are very big projects and different components. I would like to know if all this time that we have we are post-pandemic, but the time that we have the COVID-19, I mean, how did it affect, because you work on teams and groups and
yes.
I'm curious to know.
Yeah, I did. I kept journals of ideas, and I went back to drawing a lot. I did quite a bit of drawing during the pandemic, in developing a sort of a new body of work was personally my own. I work a little bit with my daughter, who grew up in the art world, and she's a scenic design painter in a scenic studio, and we would often have discussions about what she was able to paint all the time, because she lived very close to it's a traditional, it's called Oliphant Studios. It's a traditional scenic studio for film and for photography, and they do all landscapes, they do clouds, they do all sorts of things. And so we'd often have like discussions about what they were doing in the studio during the day. But I really sort of focused on trying to re-establish within myself where I really am inside. I went to art school, and I just ended up having to do all this stuff. So that's where I'm trying to go back into actually what I do miss is actually making things more. And that's why, when I said, I'm interested in going back into ceramics and glass and just making things, and drawing and filmmaking.
Well, I ask you because it sounded like, like a different moment in your career, the way that you describe all the projects and you going back to your inner, it's
It
that's
is.
why
I'm going back. Yeah, it is. It is. It feels like the right thing to do. I mean, I don't want to say I don't have the collaboration does take like a certain amount of energy out of you, and I just need to give myself back some stuff that's in me that I need to like extrude.
Dan, I want to ask you a quick question before we move on. Sema asks, is your daughter Sarah Oliphant?
Oh, okay. No, my daughter isn't Sarah Oliphant, but I know Sarah Oliphant, and my daughter works with Violet O'Neill and her sister Mooney. I know Sarah because she was married to the famous photographer Michael O'Neill, and my daughter Teddy grew up in that family. And
the art world
as a young girl, she painted at that studio and just ended up painting with Sarah.
Oh, that's great.
How do you know Sarah?
Babs, let me have Babs, and then we'll go next.
Okay, I have a quick question that is related to you're working with all of these many different artists, and each time you're working with the different artists, obviously all kinds of collaborations, ideas are flowing back and forth. And you as your own work, how can you describe a little bit if that really affected your own work, or were you thinking about your individual pieces that had nothing to do with the collab?
Yeah, no, I that's a good question. Yes, I absolutely in the back of my brain was missing that part of myself. I mean, in terms of
yeah, like getting absorbed, right, by them.
Because it requires a lot of listening, and giving people equal say, regardless of what I have to say. I mean, it's a process, it's a mix. But yes, you're absolutely right that I always in the back of my mind had this, I don't want to say I was suffering, maybe I was, but I always had this need to re-engage in my art practice. And during COVID, I started drawing, and that's where I'm going. I'm like working at home. I'm tired of working, and would really just like a studio, basically, at this point.
Well, thanks, Dan. Thank you. And great questions, as always, by our group. we'll move on to Sema Gurun. I'm sure I mispronounced something there, Sema.
Oh, you did very well.
Thank you. And I do want to point out, you know, we have 3 artists speaking. I say this a lot. Each of these artists could have spoke for an hour and a half. This is deep. This is rich work. This is work that is varied over years besides work that's evolving. And it's work that often has interesting philosophical and intellectual ties beyond its visual appeal, and also its technical virtuosity that both of you presented. Sema, we look forward to it. Where are you coming in from?
Well, it's hard to jump right into painting after seeing such a diverse and work on such a large scale. And again, I think that's my predecessors in this talk had big fields. I think you paint and you create according to the size you're in. And I've always painted on a smaller scale, although sometimes a large canvas. But like Nicolas and Dan, I never thought of earning a living from painting. So it went well with my my second or third profession as a psychoanalyst. It became a psychoanalytic, but at the same time, a journalistic process for me. So I wanted to share with you some transitions I went through, and perhaps to also end with the COVID. As a psychoanalyst, I see art, expression of art, creativity, very much part of free association in psychoanalysis. And so the creative process is almost the same, except one is becomes diffused in the air, affecting another person. And this is more or less present on a canvas with borders. But here, let me just share some screen. I think I may have too many. I may have too many paintings to show you, so I will cut back if we're ending at. Oops, let me do this.
I'm sure we'll go a little bit over, and just feel free to run through some quickly or however you like.
Okay, let me just open up. Okay, so I call this expressionist or pre-conscious abstract, and you'll see why at the end. I've started being very stimulated by archaeology. I was born in Turkey and always went back and looked at the archaeological sites. This is Ephesus, for instance. But I was also, the layers of civilization fascinated me. So they come up in my paintings, and also cave paintings, as well as the Aborigine art have fascinated me. So they fare in my expressions, and this is of Ephesus, and again, sort of the Greco-Roman takeoffs that transitional things that I went through.
That's nice.
I suppose it's a color I find is a very important factor.
That's a nice painting.
This is a city I happen to like, Paris. A little bit of the gargoyles of Notre Dame up in the air. Another Parisian. Venetian. Oh, you know what I didn't do? Okay, here we go. Now it's easy. Okay, so I think this is going to be better. And let me know if I'm going too fast. I think because there's of the time limit, I'm sort of rushing through. And so these are some of the transitions from semi-figurative to expressionist. This is the series that I think put me over into the hurdle of expressionist to abstract, a Ming horse that I had broke. So I struggled to glue it together, and I thought, well, I'll just photograph it and then paint from photographs, which I do frequently. I don't just paint on paper directly, but there's always a scene in mind, a composition of some sort that I divert from according to the day's mood. And so this was the beginning of the Broken Horse series that I did. And I couldn't glue the horse, and the painting also turned out to be sort of a vessel for my psyche at that time. And here now, from the transition to the abstract, the final of the 5 paintings that I did on this subject. And these are again takes on my walks in Central Park, and bodies of water always have fascinated me. I call this one Flotsam. And diverse. This is the Aborigine influenced piece that I've worked on some time ago.
Are we looking at 3-foot, 4-foot art, Audriana?
No, it's small. It's more like 24 by 18. I think the biggest I have is 30 by 24. I've painted bigger, but they're rolled up and I've forgotten all about them. But these are smaller works of art. Unlike Dan, I never worked on this huge, large scale. I don't think I ever will. I think I'm going to even go scale down even more.
Me too. Me too.
So this is also the.
I like that line. Painting is a vessel for your psyche. You know, and being in the field of psychotherapy, let me ask you, what have you learned about yourself through your painting?
That's a good question.
It's not a light question, but you know, I don't know if you're free associating images. Your painting is beautiful. It's obvious you're a pure painter. And by that, I mean, you love mixing color, composition, you're a pure painter, but you're coming at this from another side too. And you're coming at it, you know, from sort of like a very warm intellectual side. So give it some thought. I'm just curious because, painting can tell us about ourselves.
Well, it was I realized that my unconscious was always at work, or pre-conscious, and I always realized it after the fact, what had gone through. I mean, I think we all, when you paint with other artists, as I do in studios, you pick up on their pre-conscious psyche. We're all empathically painting. Even our palettes look alike after a while. The colors that we use, that is, and also if everyone has their own expression, like a handwriting, which is also an expression of our psyche. Handwriting analysis, of course, is a social science. So painting is a bit that way. So I have a political side also, which is this one. There was a conflict, I think there still is, between Russia and Georgia in southern Ossetia, and a school was attacked. And these are some mothers with kids coming out of the window of the school. And so I called it on aggression. And these were, again, the figures you see around, again, are similar to cave paintings and that kind of wall writing. I love murals, ancient murals. So I incorporated it into modern aggression. And again, this is another sort of, not political, but it's again, this bow and arrow yielding person is running away from an animal on a mountaintop. And I don't really know what what I learned about myself at that point. Was I running away from something? I don't know on that day. It could be, but these things come to you years later. I mean, if not immediate.
Sema,
There
are
are
you familiar with Carl Jung's Red Book?
Oh, yeah.
yes, I've seen it, and I believe in his collective unconscious. I think we all share a collective unconscious, and it's expressive in the works we do together in the same studio. If you look at a group of artists in the same studio, you could see a continuity, I think. What is the word? Consanguinity. In the work that comes out of that kind of a group effort. Probably Dan would know about that, having worked with a team.
You know, and oddly enough, you can apply that to a building. So Rauschenberg studio was in a building with Jasper Johns.
Yeah, on Crosby Street.
And Keith Haring was across from Kenny Scharf in their building they were in. So you're right.
Thank you for that.
It can be this sort of brain that is, you know, you're directly sort of sharing with, you know, unconsciously with a studio mate, but it may be a building mate as well. And in some sense, it could be the New York City vibe in the 80s.
I think that's very true. I think that, I mean, if I can comment on that, I think that that vibe in the 80s, you know, certainly when Jean-Michel was, you know, alive, and Keith and all those people, Andy, there was that whole mind meld. I mean, there was a cross current going on. There was like this funny like electrical plug that was in everybody's head, you know, and it was a social undertaking of discussion.
Well, I think there was also economically based, because they were probably all tied into the same economic, market kind of thing. Especially the ABEX group that was supported by many foundations and endowments as a sort of a polarization of it was part of the Cold War conflict. Polarization where America supported sort of a very expressive group of artists, whereas in Russia, for instance, the art was huge sculptures of heroes, whatnot. So there was this polarization of art movements in both, in the Cold War, that I think was funded in a big way. And I think that the people you mentioned, certainly Randy Warhol, a lot of their works were funded, and it was, I mean, to the maybe the third world, it would seem like perhaps indulged art and spoiled art in a way, the way they worked in these huge scales and used up so much paint, and so it was a very consumer oriented way of expression, which, I mean, I don't mean to be judgmental about it, but there was a political force behind it, is what I'm saying.
Well, that's an interesting read, to say the least. I'll have to say though, looking at your painting, at the same time, it draws me back to like turn of the century Franz Marc style painting. Kandinsky comes to mind.
Oh yeah.
And it's certainly the way you flatten up. You have to think of Matisse as, if not an influence, at least.
Well, they're all my influences. And Kandinsky's wife was, I think, Gabrielle Muller. I really like her work. I saw it recently at Sotheby's, and really liked her work. And they came from a period called Orphism, which was a sort of indulgence in color, sort of a reaction to the Cubists, which were too intellectual a movement. Perhaps my horse series perhaps was at one point Cubist, you're taking structures apart, putting them back together on the canvas kind of thing. But I think I've gone through different different periods. But I think the most important thing that I would like to show you is that as I became more abstract, we had the COVID onset in December 19. We were hearing about things, but not really taking stock of it. By January, February, it was becoming clear that we were part of a pandemic, but it wasn't really admitted by the government. So, but I was painting, I painted this, sometimes to relax. I'll take a Bruegel drawing or painting that I've seen somewhere, and I'll quickly do a 10-minute painting of it just to loosen up. And this is the wedding feast. I don't know if you can see it. My screen is a little blocked, but
no, you see it, and you can recognize Bruegel. You've sort of characterized him in a blocky way with different coloration. That's quite brilliant.
Yeah,
I love that idea that you do a warm-up painting as well.
But this is also, are you able to see that they're men carrying trays of soup? But in this case, it looks, afterwards I realized it looked like a stretcher. Yeah. And so, and I thought that this sort of preceded this other kind of work that I was doing. Now, I didn't like these things that I was doing. It was just coming out of me. And I didn't know where I was going with it. I love the animal world, so there's always an animal that comes up in my paintings. But then I realized that as I did more of it, for instance, this is Columbus Circle. And again, it was, we were looking at a lot of biological forms on television, in the news, of what the COVID virus looked like. So I wasn't conscious at all of this kind of an influence on the painting. But then, I don't know how I got, and then, but then there was this piece with this at the end, again, it looks very microscopic to me in a way, coming out and giving birth to some sort of a human there. Again, I think it's a premonition of the pandemic that came out in my paintings. And of course, this is again the Greco-Roman period, as I called it, the inconsolable, which was the case with so many people who lost their family members during this period. And this is, again, I called it Touron. Everybody knows what Touron is, right?
No, I do not.
It's the what is that substance the French used to drink?
Absinthe.
Absinthe, thank you. It's the substance in absinthe. So it's I think many people kind of lost themselves during the pandemic in this kind of a foggy, not a foggy, but perhaps a morphed way of being at home, where the days meld into each other, and there is no outer structure. So we're all within there's no motion outside. So we're all within our own world and psyche.
I do want to read a few of the comments. Stephanie Rudolph says, Sema, your blue horse and transition there remind me of the Blue Rider.
It's a rider, that's what I thought.
Michael Krasowitz says, the concept of entrainment, where two clocks synchronize if in the same room, also applies to the body. If one breathes at a controlled rate, the internal organs will synchronize as well. Fran Kornfeld mentions, Sema, your painting reminds her as well of Fran's mark. And I think Jenna Lass says it very well when she says, the work is painterly and introspective, encompassing an internal landscape. And I think that's what you were going for, your sort of psyche. And I think like Jung did in his Red Book, he was just getting it out. You're getting it out with not necessarily knowing, but you're accepting the feelings and the emotions and sort of letting it flow through. Do continue, Sema. Fascinating work, beautiful painting. Where did you learn how to paint like this?
Well, I was under the influence of a number of artists whose studios I painted in at the Art Students League. And before that, when I was much younger, I studied for a bit at the National Academy, which doesn't exist anymore. I had my own studio one summer there, all by myself with a skylight, which was wonderful. But I've studied with a diverse group of people: Henry Finkelstein from the League, Bill Scharf, who was Roscoe's assistant teacher, Larry Poon's last, who else? Bill Scharf. I've had many influences. The French moderns, of course, as you all have gone through. The German expressionists that I've flipped through. There's so much expression in art globally, and I traveled a lot and went to many museums, and was amongst many artists. So this is my wish for everyone to have a wonderful summer solstice. This is again a Greco-Roman summer solstice painting I did. And the solstice is this weekend coming up. So I wish you a wonderful long day. We're all coming out of our hiding. And I think this was the last one. Yes, that was the last of the lot. I did go through them rather fast, but and some things probably I missed along the way. There's so much to talk about in art. I mean, it's hard to cover it in a quarter of an hour, but anyway, this is a lovely way of sharing with all of you. This is also this is my cat Emma.
Oh.
She fares in my paintings a lot.
Well, thank you.
This is my daughter's rabbit.
There we go. I should just.
Oh, you have a rabbit.
Well, my daughter's rabbit I have, who's on a road trip, and she gave me her rabbit.
What?
Sema, very nice.
His name is Gesso.
Very nice, Sema. I want to say, it's interesting, when you said you worked with hieroglyphics or images from early history, from cave painting, makes me think of Alyssa Pritzker. If you're not familiar with Alyssa's work, just have a look. Her mark making does draw back both Aboriginal mark making and some sort of.
Oh, somebody else has got a cat too.
Yeah, maybe even a pre-consciousness. There we go. Nicholas has a cat.
So I just like to bring up sort of one point because, like big projects, came up a lot. I going just back in time, just briefly, a lot of my influences came from also there's a great history and collaboration between Annie Albers and Joseph Albers, right? Who were doing design and painting and textile and all of this, or the Eames, who were doing both furniture and architecture and textiles. Alvaro Alto, whose wife was also an architect. So there is this this sub-parallel thing going throughout history that runs in conjunction with studio practice and art making, craft making.
And of course, Stieglitz and O'Keeffe.
Oh yeah.
It was probably closer. You think of Jackson Pollock and
Lee Krasner.
And Lee Krasner, thank you. And of course, she obviously had a much larger influence. It's even said about Einstein that early on in his career, he was working with a woman assistant, and a lot of his political ideas may have been joint ideas, but like a good scientist, he probably killed her. But in other words, to the point, often remember Picasso was the kind of guy who did work with Braque developing Cubism, and then went ahead and predated his painting, so it looked like he discovered Cubism before Braque. So you have
and it's everywhere. I mean, I just saw this film on Madame Curie, which is like a brilliant film about her and her husband, and their collaboration in the development in France for the discovery of uranium, which went on the periodic charts, which was like at that time unheard of. And she was brilliant. And they collaborated their whole lives. Plus they were totally in love, and which I'm sure complicated things. So
I would like to say to Sema that I just finished seeing on Netflix Without Gorky.
oh, Gorky, yeah.
Without Gorky, is it?
Yes, and you know, they show Turkish, you know, landscapes at some point, and I see a lot of colors of Turkish colors on your work.
Oh,
You
do
know?
you? That's
Yes.
interesting.
I was looking at every painting, and it just reminded me to the landscapes that I saw on that film.
Nicholas, I'd like
I
to
wanted to mention.
come visit you.
Thank you.
I wanted to just make a comment about the being around others and the unconscious influence of painting and colors and things that you were mentioning, that you were in the studio with others and how that influences what you're doing. That there's also these energies in my mind, I guess, that float around throughout the world. And what is interesting to me is that when I'm interested in something or start working on an installation or a project or a particular field of interest, suddenly all of these things and other artists doing this start coming my way. Like an email will come in and suddenly I see something, and I've never known whether I'm bringing it from the universe to me or if it's because we're doing a collective sending out the energy into people that float around you somehow, and they're doing something that's like what you're doing, but neither of you have seen each other's work before. And that's completely different than this idea of the you know, the building influence or the nearby influence, this idea that it's out there in the atmosphere somehow. And I'm continually amazed by that. I don't know if anybody else experiences that, but somehow it seems to be that way when I'm doing certain things, that suddenly, let's say when I started working with hair, human hair, and suddenly I'm just seeing all these people doing things with human hair. Or if I start working with stain on organza, suddenly I'm seeing these pieces that are coming in that people are doing this. Anyway, just throwing that out.
Synchronicity, it's called synchronicity. I mean, we're all such empathic creatures. It's impossible not to be connected, really, even globally.
It's part of the quantum. I think that we talk, Babs, about it, but you know, it's part of the connection, the quantum physics. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this is what we always sort of talk about. We've done this now for 60 Mondays, or maybe it's 61. Yeah, 61. And we sort of come together as a hive, as a group, as a clan. And I think one thing I've learned is we're connected in more ways than we realize. And I think that's a point that we're all hitting at here. I want to thank all the presenters. Thank you so much to Nicolas Touron, Daniel Reiser, and Sema Gurun. Thank you all. There were so many nice comments as well in the chat that I didn't read, but everybody was really taken by your work. Again, great diversity, I think, presented, but all artists with deep and rich thoughts that definitely overlap. There definitely is a synchronicity. Babs, you mentioned hair. Last week we had an artist present about hair, first time it came up, and it had it to do with identity and sending hair around the globe, and it was an immigration statement. So it's just interesting. And one week we had an artist talk about using...
Wait, let me interrupt you. She and I are communicating. She's going to send me some of her hair for my heirloom project. So that's why I'm saying that the things I'm talking about, it's interesting how that happens. Okay.
Exactly. We also had one week an artist talked about that material where it's that beetle or that insect, chenille is it, that sort of rubbed up and
Yes.
turned into the red material, and a very early material used, just as you, Sema, were going back to Greco-Roman. Well, sure enough, the next week we had another artist bring up that material. I mean, the synchronicity of that was unique. I think the point is we build structures. This Daniel, the sort of Buckminster Fuller work, there's this incredible construction. The pieces don't know their role in the whole. And in an odd way, we're all pieces, but we're part of some whole that we just can't conceive. But one thing we do know, we influence each other. We sort of applaud each other. We love each other. Unfortunately, in our culture, we hate and we kill often, but maybe it's as simple as just trying to do the best for others, because we are a piece of something together. So I want to thank you. This is Artist Talk on Art. We're ATOA. If you like what you saw, tell a friend, come again another time, come up with a theme. Thank you to all the artists. This was very enjoyable.
Thank you.
I'll stop the recording. There we go.
Bye-bye.